Casablanca film.
Casablanca is a 1942 American romantic drama film directed by Michael Curtiz and based on Humphrey Bogart and Joan Alison's unproduced stage play Everybody Comes to Rix. The film stars Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, and Paul Henreid, and features Claude Rains, Conrad Veidt, Sidney Greenstreet, Peter Lorre, and Dooley Wilson. Set during World War II, it focuses on a man torn between, in the words of one character, love and virtue. He must choose between his love for a woman and helping her Czech Resistance leader husband escape the Vichy-controlled Moroccan city of Casablanca to continue his fight against the Nazis. Story editor Irene Diamond convinced producer Hal Wallis to purchase the film rights to the play in January 1942. Brothers Julius J. and Philip G. Epstein were initially assigned to write the script. However, despite studio resistance, they left after the attack on Pearl Harbor to work on Frank Capra's Why We Fight series. Howard Koch was assigned to the screenplay until the Epsteins returned. Casey Robinson assisted with 3 weeks of rewrites, but his work would later go uncredited. Wallis chose Curtiz to direct the film after his first choice, William Wyler, became unavailable. Filming began on May 25, 1942, and ended on August 3, and was shot entirely at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, with the exception of one sequence at Van Nuys Airport in Van Nuys. Although Casablanca was an A-list film with established stars and first-rate writers, no one involved with its production expected it to be anything out of the ordinary. It was just one of hundreds of pictures produced by Hollywood every year. Casablanca had its world premiere on November 26, 1942 in New York City, and was released on January 23, 1943, in the United States. The film was a solid if unspectacular success in its initial run, rushed into release to take advantage of the publicity from the Allied invasion of North Africa a few weeks earlier. Despite a changing assortment of screenwriters adapting an unstaged play, barely keeping ahead of production, and Bogart attempting his first romantic leading role, Casablanca won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Its lead character, memorable lines, and pervasive theme song have all become iconic. The film has consistently ranked near the top of lists of the greatest films of all time.
Plot.
It is early December 1941. American expatriate Rick Blaine is the proprietor of an upscale nightclub and gambling den in Casablanca. Rick's Café American attracts a varied clientele, Vichy French, Italian, and German officials. Refugees desperate to reach the still neutral United States. And those who prey on them. Although Rick professes to be neutral in all matters, it is later revealed he ran guns to Ethiopia during its war with Italy and fought on the Loyalist side against the fascist nationalists in the Spanish Civil War. Petty crook Bogart shows up and boasts to Rick of letters of transit obtained by murdering 2 German couriers. The papers allow the bearer to travel freely around German-controlled Europe and to neutral Portugal, and are thus almost priceless to the refugees stranded in Casablanca. Bogart plans to sell them at the club later that night. Before he can, however, he is arrested by the local police under the command of Vichy Captain Louis Renault, an unabashedly corrupt official. Bogart dies in custody without revealing that he had entrusted the letters to Rick. At this point, the reason for Rick's bitterness, his former lover, Norwegian Ilse Lund, walks into his establishment. Upon spotting Rick's friend and house pianist, Sam, Ilse implores him to play as time goes by. Rick storms over, furious that Sam has disobeyed his order never to perform that song, and is stunned to see Ilse. She is accompanied by her husband, Victor Laszlo, a renowned fugitive Czech Resistance leader. They need the letters to escape to America, where he can continue his work. German Major Strasser has come to Casablanca to see that Laszlo does not succeed. When Laszlo makes inquiries, Ferrari, a major underworld figure and Rick's friendly business rival, divulges his suspicion that Rick has the letters. In private, Rick refuses to sell at any price, telling Laszlo to ask his wife the reason. They are interrupted when Strasser leads a group of officers in singing Die Victim Rin. Laszlo orders the house band to defiantly play La Marseillaise. When the band looks at Rick, he nods his head. Laszlo starts singing, alone at first, then patriotic fervor grips the crowd and everyone joins in, drowning out the Germans. In retaliation, Strasser has Renault close the club. That night, Ilse confronts Rick in the deserted cafe. When he refuses to give her the letters, she threatens him with a gun, but then confesses that she still loves him. She explains that when they first met and fell in love in Paris in 1940, she believed that her husband had been killed attempting to escape from a concentration camp. Later, while preparing to flee with Rick from the imminent fall of the city to the German army, she learned that Laszlo was alive and in hiding. She left Rick without explanation to tend her ill husband. Rick's bitterness dissolves. He agrees to help, leading her to believe that she will stay with him when Laszlo leaves. When Laszlo unexpectedly shows up, having narrowly escaped a police raid on a resistance meeting, Rick has way to Carl spirit Ilse away. Laszlo, aware of Rick's love for Ilse, tries to persuade him to use the letters to take her to safety. When the police arrest Laszlo on a minor, trumped-up charge, Rick convinces Renault to release him by promising to set him up for a much more serious crime, possession of the letters of the transit. To allay Renault's suspicions, Rick explains he and Ilse will be leaving for America. When Renault tries to arrest Laszlo as arranged, Rick forces him at gunpoint to assist in their escape. At the last moment, Rick makes Ilse board the plane to Lisbon with her husband, telling her she would regret it if she stayed, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your life. Strasser, tipped off by Renault, drives up alone. Rick kills him when he tries to intervene. When the police arrive, Renault pauses, then tells them to round up the usual suspects. Renault suggests to Rick that they join the Free French in Brazzaville. As they walk away into the fog, Rick says, "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship."
Cast.
The play's cast consisted of 16 speaking parts and several extras. The film's script enlarged it to 22 speaking parts and hundreds of extras. The cast is notably international, only 3 of the credited actors were born in the United States. The top-billed actors are Humphrey Bogart as Rick Blaine. Rick was his first truly romantic role. Ingrid Bergman as Ilse Lund. Bergman's official website calls Ilse her most famous and enduring role. The Swedish actress's Hollywood debut in Intermezzo had been well received, but her subsequent films were not major successes until Casablanca. Film critic Roger Ebert called her luminous, and commented on the chemistry between her and Bogart. "She paints his face with her eyes." Other actresses considered for the role of Ilse included Anne Sheridan, Hedy Lamarr and Michelle Morgan. Wallace obtained the services of Bergman, who was contracted to David O. Selznick, by lending Olivia de Havilland in exchange, Paul Henreid as Victor Laszlo. Henreid, an Austrian actor who had emigrated in 1935, was reluctant to take the role. "It set as a stiff forever," according to Paul Henreid, until he was promised top billing along with Bogart and Bergman. Henreid did not get on well with his fellow actors. He considered Bogart a mediocre actor. Bergman called Henreid a prima donna. The second-billed actors are Claude Rains as Captain Louis Renault. Rains was an English actor born in London. He had previously worked with Michael Curtiz on The Adventures of Robin Hood. He later played in Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious with Ingrid Bergman, Conrad Veidt as Major Heinrich Strasser. He was a German actor who had appeared in the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. He fled the Nazis, but in the United States was frequently cast as a Nazi in American films related to the war. Sidney Greenstreet as Signor Ferrari, a rival nightclub owner. Another Englishman, Greenstreet had previously starred with Lorre and Bogart in his film debut in The Maltese Falcon, Peter Lorre as Signor Ugart. Lorre, who was born in Austria-Hungary, had left Germany in 1933. He had previously appeared with Bogart and Greenstreet in The Maltese Falcon. Also credited are Kurt Boys as the pickpocket. Boys was a German Jewish actor and refugee. He had one of the longest careers in film, making his first appearance in 1907 and his last in 1987, Leonid Kinski as Sasha, the Russian bartender infatuated with Yvonne. He was born into a Jewish family in Russia and had immigrated to the U.S. Madeleine Liebau as Yvonne, Rick's soon discarded girlfriend. The French actress was married to Marcel Delio until their divorce in 1942. Joy Page as Anina Brandl, the young Bulgarian refugee. The third credited American, she was the stepdaughter of Jack Warner, the studio head, John Quayle's as Berger, Laszlo's Resistance contact. He was born in Canada, but grew up in America. He appeared in many of John Ford's movies, S.Z. Sakal, credited as S.K. Sakal, as Karl, the waiter. He was a Jewish-Hungarian actor who fled from Germany in 1939. His three sisters later died in a concentration camp, Dooley Wilson as Sam. He was one of the few American members of the cast. A drummer, he could not play the piano. Even after shooting had been completed, Wallace considered dubbing over Wilson's voice for the songs. Producer Wallace considered changing the character to a woman and thought of casting singers Hazel Scott or Ella Fitzgerald. Notable uncredited actors are Leon Bielisko as a dealer in Rick's Cafe. A Russian-American character actor, he appeared in 13 films the year Casablanca was released, Marcel Delio as Émile the Croupier. He had been a star in French cinema, appearing in Jean Renoir's La Grande Illusion and La Règle de Jeu. After he fled the fall of France and went to America, he was reduced to bit parts in Hollywood. He had a key role in another of Bogart's films, To Have and Have Not, Helmut Dantine as Jan Brandl, the Bulgarian roulette player married to Anina Brandl. Another Austrian, he had spent time in a concentration camp after the Anschluss but left Europe after being freed, William Edmonds as a contact man at Rick's. He usually played characters with heavy accents, such as Martini in It's a Wonderful Life, 1946, Gregory Gay as the German banker who was refused entry to the casino by Rick. Gay was a Russian-born actor who went to the United States in 1917 after the Russian Revolution. Torben Mayer as the Dutch banker who runs the second-largest banking house in Amsterdam. Mayer was a Danish actor, George London, one of those who sing La Marseillaise. London was a Montreal-born bass baritone opera singer, Georges Renavant as a conspirator, Corinna Mura as the guitar player who sings Tango del Rose while Laszlo is consulting with Berger, and later accompanies the crowd on La Marseillaise, Dan Seymour as Abdul the doorman. He was an American actor who often played villains, including the principal one in To Have and Have Not, and one of the secondary ones in Key Largo, both opposite Bogart, Norma Varden as the Englishwoman whose husband has his wallet stolen. She was a famous English character actress, Jean Delval as the French police radio announcer who, following the opening montage sequence, reports the news of the murder of the two German couriers. Leo White is the waiter Émile, not to be confused with the croupier Émile, from whom Renaud orders a drink when he sits down with the Laszlos. White was a familiar face in many Charlie Chaplin two-reelers in the 1910s, usually playing an upper-class antagonist. Much of the emotional impact of the film has been attributed to the large proportion of European exiles and refugees who were extras or played minor roles. A witness to the filming of the Duel of the Anthems sequence said he saw many of the actors crying and realized that they were all real refugees. Harmitz argues that they brought to a dozen small roles in Casablanca an understanding and a desperation that could never have come from central casting. The German citizens among them had to keep curfew, as they were classified by the US as enemy aliens and under restrictions. They were frequently cast as Nazis in war films, even though many were Jewish. Some of the refugee actors are Louis Viarco as a refugee in Rick's. Born Lutzelschule in Austria, he moved to America shortly after the Anschluss because he was Jewish and changed his name. Trude Berliner as a baccarat player in Rick's. Born in Berlin, she was a famous cabaret performer and film actress. Jewish, she left Germany in 1933, Elke Grünig as Mrs. Luchtek. Born in Vienna, she was a silent movie star in Germany who came to America after the Anschluss, Lottie Paulfi as a refugee trying to sell her diamonds. Born in Germany, she played stage roles at a prestigious theatre in Darmstadt, Germany. She emigrated to the U.S. after the Nazis came to power in 1933. She later married another Casablanca actor, Wolfgang Salzer, Richard Roener Strasser's aide, Captain Heinze. The Austrian Jew had acted in German films, but fled the Nazis. Ludwig Stossel as Mr. Luchtog, the German refugee whose English is not so good. Born in Austria, the Jewish actor was imprisoned following the Anschluss. When he was released, he left for England and then America. Stossel became famous for doing a long series of commercials for Italian-Swiss colony wine producers. Dressed in an alpine hat and lederhosen, Stossel was their spokesman with the slogan, "That little old winemaker, me, Hans Twardowski," as a Nazi officer who argues with a French officer over a Von. He was born in Stettin, Germany, now Szczecin, Poland. Wolfgang Salzer is a free French agent who was shot in the opening scene of the movie, was a silent movie actor in Germany who left when the Nazis took over. When applying for his U.S. visa, he discovered that he had been born in Cincinnati, Ohio when his parents were visiting the United States and thus he was an American citizen. He later married Casablanca actress Lottie Porphy. Salzer had one of the longest careers in the history of cinema. He first appeared in a movie in 1915, when he was 14, and last appeared in a made-for-TV film in 1986. The comedian Jack Benny may have had an unbilled cameo role, as claimed by a contemporary newspaper advertisement and reportedly in the Casablanca press book. When asked in his column Movie Answer Man, critic Roger Ebert first replied, "It looks something like him. That's all I can say." He wrote in a later column, "I think you're right."
Production.
The film was based on Murray Burnett and Joan Alison's then unproduced play Everybody Comes to Rick's. The Warner Brothers story analyst who read the play, Stephen Carnott, called it, approvingly, sophisticated hokum, and story editor Irene Diamond convinced producer Hal Wallace to buy the rights in January 1942 for $20,000, the most anyone in Hollywood had ever paid for an unproduced play. The project was renamed Casablanca, apparently in imitation of the 1938 hit Algiers. Although an initial filming date was selected for April 10, 1942, delays led to a start of production on May 25. Filming was completed on August 3, and the production cost $1,039,000, $75,000 over budget, above average for the time. The film was shot in sequence, mainly because only the first half of the script was ready when filming began. The entire picture was shot in the studio, except for the sequence showing Major Strasser's arrival, which was filmed at Van Nuys Airport, and a few short clips of stock footage views of Paris. The street used for the exterior shots had recently been built for another film, The Desert Song, and redressed for the Paris flashbacks. It remained on the Warner's backlot until the 1960s. The set for Rick's was built in 3 unconnected parts, so the internal layout of the building is indeterminate. In a number of scenes, the camera looks through a wall from the cafe area into Rick's office. The background of the final scene, which shows a Lockheed Model 12 Electra Junior airplane with personnel walking around it, was staged using little-person extras and a proportionate cardboard plane. Fog was used to mask the model's unconvincing appearance. Nevertheless, the Disney's Hollywood Studios theme park in Orlando, Florida purchased a Lockheed 12A for its Great Movie Ride attraction, and initially claimed that it was the actual plane used in the film. Film critic Roger Ebert called Hal Wallace the key creative force for his attention to the details of production, down to insisting on a real parrot in the Blue Parrot bar. The difference between Bergman's and Bogart's height caused some problems. She was some 2 inches, 5 centimeters, taller than Bogart, and claimed Curtiz had Bogart stand on blocks or sit on cushions in their scenes together. Later, there were plans for a further scene, showing Rick, Renault and a detachment of Free French soldiers on a ship, to incorporate the Allies' 1942 invasion of North Africa. It proved too difficult to get Claude Rains for the shoot, and the scene was finally abandoned after David O. Selznick judged it would be a terrible mistake to change the ending.
Writing.
The original play was inspired by a trip to Europe made by Murray Burnett and his wife in 1938, during which they visited Vienna shortly after the Anschluss and were affected by the anti-Semitism they saw. In the south of France, they went to a nightclub that had a multinational clientele, among them many exiles and refugees, and the prototype of Sam. The first writers assigned to the script were twins Julius and Philip Epstein, who, against the wishes of Warner Brothers, left after the attack on Pearl Harbor at Frank Capra's request to work on the Why We Fight series in Washington, D.C. While they were gone, the other credited writer, Howard Koch, was assigned. He produced some 30 to 40 pages. When the Epstein brothers returned after a month, they were reassigned to Casablanca and, contrary to what Koch claimed in 2 published books, his work was not used. In the final Warner Brothers budget for the film, the Epsteins were paid $30,416, while Koch earned $4,200. In the play, the Ilsa character was an American named Lois Meredith. She did not meet Laszlo until after her relationship with Rick in Paris had ended. Rick was a lawyer. To make Rick's motivation more believable, Wallace, Curtiz, and the screenwriters decided to set the film before the Pearl Harbor attack. The uncredited Casey Robinson assisted with 3 weeks of rewrites, including contributing the series of meetings between Rick and Ilsa in the cafe. Koch highlighted the political and melodramatic elements, while Curtiz seems to have favored the romantic parts, insisting on retaining the Paris flashbacks. Wallace wrote the final line, "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship," after shooting had been completed. Bogart had to be called in a month after the end of filming to dub it. Despite the many writers, the film has what Ebert describes as a wonderfully unified and consistent script. Koch later claimed it was the tension between his own approach and Curtiz's which accounted for this. Surprisingly, these disparate approaches somehow meshed, and perhaps it was partly this tug-of-war between Curtiz and me that gave the film a certain balance. Julius Epstein would later note the screenplay contained more corn than in the states of Kansas and Iowa combined. But when corn works, there's nothing better. The film ran into some trouble with Joseph Breen of the Production Code Administration, the Hollywood self-censorship body, who opposed the suggestions that Captain Renault extorted sexual favors from his supplicants, and that Rick and Ilsa had slept together in Paris. Extensive changes were made, with several lines of dialogue removed or altered. All direct references to sex were deleted. Renault's selling of visas for sex, and Rick and Ilsa's previous sexual relationship were implied elliptically rather than referenced explicitly. Also, in the original script, when Sam plays As Time Goes By, Rick remarks, "What the are you playing?" This line implying a curse word was removed at the behest of the Hays office.
Direction.
Wallace's first choice for director was William Wyler, but he was unavailable, so Wallace turned to his close friend Michael Curtiz. Curtiz was a Hungarian Jewish émigré. He had come to the U.S. in the 1920s, but some of his family were refugees from Nazi Europe. Roger Ebert has commented that in Casablanca very few shots are memorable as shots, as Curtiz wanted images to express the story rather than to stand alone. He contributed relatively little to development of the plot. Casey Robinson said Curtiz knew nothing whatever about story. He saw it in pictures, and you supplied the stories. Critic Andrew Saris called the film the most decisive exception to the auteur theory, of which Saris was the most prominent proponent in the United States. Algene Harmitz has responded, nearly every Warner Brothers picture was an exception to the auteur theory. Other critics give more credit to Curtiz. Sidney Rosenzweig, in his study of the director's work, sees the film as a typical example of Curtiz's highlighting of the moral dilemmas. The second unit montages, such as the opening sequence of the refugee trail and the invasion of France, were directed by Don Siegel.
Cinematography.
The cinematographer was Arthur Ederson, a veteran who had previously shot The Maltese Falcon and Frankenstein. Particular attention was paid to photographing Bergman. She was shot mainly from her preferred left side, often with a softening gauze filter and with catch lights to make her eyes sparkle. The whole effect was designed to make her face seem ineffably sad and tender and nostalgic. Bars of shadow across the characters and in the background variously imply imprisonment, the crucifix, the symbol of the Free French forces, and emotional turmoil. Dark film noir and expressionist lighting is used in several scenes, particularly towards the end of the picture. Rosenzweig argues these shadow and lighting effects are classic elements of the Curtiz style, along with the fluid camera work and the use of the environment as a framing device.
Music.
The music was written by Max Steiner, who was best known for the score for Gone with the Wind. The song As Time Goes By Hermann Happelt had been part of the story from the original play. Steiner wanted to write his own composition to replace it, but Bergman had already cut her hair short for her next role, Maria in For Whom the Bell Tolls, and could not reshoot the scenes which incorporated the song, so Steiner based the entire score on it and La Marseillaise, the French national anthem, transforming them to reflect changing moods. Particularly notable is the duel of the songs between Strasser and Laszlo at Rick's Café. In the soundtrack, La Marseillaise is played by a full orchestra. Originally, the opposing piece for this iconic sequence was to be the Horst Wessel Lied, a Nazi anthem, but this was still under international copyright in non-Allied countries. Instead Die Weg dem Rhein was used. The opening bars of the Deutschlandlied, the national anthem of Germany, are featured throughout the score as a motif to represent the Germans, much as La Marseillaise is used to represent the Allies. Other songs include It Had to Be You, music by Isham Jones, lyrics by Gus Kahn, Shine, music by Ford Dabney, lyrics by Cecil Mack and Lou Brown, Avalon, music and lyrics by Al Jolson, Buddy De Silva and Vincent Rose, Perfidia, by Alberto Dominguez, The Very Thought of You, by Ray Noble, and Knock on Wood, music by M.K. Jerome, lyrics by Jack Skull, the only original song. The piano featured in the Paris flashback sequences was sold in New York City on December 14, 2012 at Sotheby's for more than $600,000 to an anonymous bidder.
Timing of release.
Although an initial release date was anticipated for spring 1943, a film premiered at the Hollywood Theater in New York City on November 26, 1942, to coincide with the Allied invasion of North Africa and the capture of Casablanca. In the 1,500-seat theater, the film grossed $255,000 over 10 weeks. It went into general release on January 23, 1943, to take advantage of the Casablanca Conference, a high-level meeting in the city between Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It was a substantial but not spectacular box office success, taking $3.7 million on its initial U.S. release, making it the seventh best-selling film of 1943. The Office of War Information prevented screening of the film to troops in North Africa, believing it would cause resentment among Vichy supporters in the region.
Reception. Initial response.
Casablanca received consistently good reviews. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times wrote, "The Warners have a picture which makes the spine tingle and the heart take a leap." The newspaper applauded the combination of sentiment, humor and pathos with taut melodrama and bristling intrigue. While he noted its devious convolutions of the plot, he praised the screenplay quality as of the best, and the cast's performances as all of the first order. The trade paper Variety commended the film's combination of fine performances, engrossing story and neat direction, and the variety of moods, action, suspense, comedy and drama that makes Casablanca an A1 entry at the BO. Film as splendid anti-Axis propaganda, particularly in as much as the propaganda is strictly a byproduct of the principal action and contributes to it instead of getting in the way. The review also applauded the performances of Bergman and Henreid and note that Bogart, as might be expected, is more at ease as the bitter and cynical operator of a joint than as a lover, but handles both assignments with superb finesse. Some other reviews were less enthusiastic. The New Yorker rated it only pretty tolerable.
Lasting influence.
The film has grown in popularity. Murray Burnett called it true yesterday, true today, true tomorrow. By 1955, the film had brought in $6.8 million, making it the third most successful of Warner's wartime movies, behind Shine On, Harvest Moon and This Is the Army. On April 21, 1957, the Brattle Theatre of Cambridge, Massachusetts, showed the film as part of a season of old movies. It was so popular that it began a tradition of screening Casablanca during the week of final exams at Harvard University, which continues to the present day. Other colleges have adopted the tradition. Todd Gitlin, a professor of sociology who had attended one of these screenings, has said that the experience was the acting out of my own personal rite of passage. The tradition helped the movie remain popular while other famous films of the 1940s have faded away. By 1977, Casablanca was the most frequently broadcast film on American television. On the film's 50th anniversary, the Los Angeles Times called Casablanca's great strength the purity of its golden age Hollywoodness, the enduring craftsmanship of his resonantly hokey dialogue. Bob Strauss wrote in the newspaper that the film achieved a near-perfect entertainment balance of comedy, romance, and suspense. According to Roger Ebert, Casablanca is probably on more lists of the greatest films of all time than any other single title, including Citizen Kane, because of its wider appeal. Ebert opined that Citizen Kane is generally considered to be a greater film but Casablanca is more loved. Ebert said that he has never heard of a negative review of the film, even though individual elements can be criticized, citing unrealistic special effects and the stiff character portrayal of Laszlo. Rudy Bahama emphasized the variety in the picture, it's a blend of drama, melodrama, comedy, intrigue. Ebert said the film was popular because the people in it are all so good, and that it was a wonderful gem. As the resistance hero, Laszlo is ostensibly the most noble, although he is so stiff that he is hard to like. The other characters, in Bahama's words, are not cut and dried, and come into their goodness in the course of the film. Renault begins the film as a collaborator with the Nazis, who extorts sexual favors from refugees and has Agard killed. Rick, according to Bahama, is not a hero. Not a bad guy, he does what is necessary to get along with the authorities and sticks his neck out for nobody. Even Ilsa, the least active of the main characters, is caught in the emotional struggle over which man she really loves. By the end of the film, however, everybody is sacrificing. A few reviewers dissent. According to Paul Henreid, it's far from a great film, but it has a special appealingly schlocky romanticism. Umberto Eco wrote that by any strict critical standards, Casablanca is a very mediocre film. He viewed the changes the characters undergo as inconsistent rather than complex. It is a comic strip, a hodgepodge, low on psychological credibility, and with little continuity in its dramatic effects. However, he added that due to the presence of multiple archetypes which allow the power of narrative in its natural state without art intervening to discipline it, it is a movie reaching Homeric depths as a phenomenon worthy of awe. In the November-December 1982 issue of American Film, Chuck Ross claimed that he retyped the screenplay to Casablanca, changing the title back to Everybody Comes to Ricks and the name of the piano player to Dooley Wilson, and submitted it to 217 agencies. 85 of them read it. Of those, 38 rejected it outright, 33 generally recognized it, but only 8 specifically as Casablanca, 3 declared it commercially viable, and 1 suggested turning it into a novel.
Influence on later works.
Many subsequent films have drawn on elements of Casablanca. Passage to Marseille reunited Bogart, Rains, Curtiz, Greenstreet and Lorre in 1944. There are similarities between Casablanca and 2 later Bogart films, To Have and Have Not, 1944, and Sirocco, 1951. Parodies have included the Marx Brothers' A Night in Casablanca, 1946, Neil Simon's The Cheap Detective, 1978, and Out Cold, 2001. It provided the title for the 1995 hit The Usual Suspects. Woody Allen's Play It Again, Sam, 1972, appropriated Bogart's Casablanca persona as the fantasy mentor for Allen's Nebuchadnezzar character. featuring actor Jerry Lacey in the role of Bogart. A film Casablanca was a plot device in the science fiction television movie Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, 1983, based on John Barley's story. It was referred to in Terry Gilliam's dystopian Brazil, 1985. Warner Brothers produced its own parody in the homage Casablanca, a 1995 Bugs Bunny cartoon. In Casablanca, a novella by Argentine writer Edgar Brau, the protagonist somehow wanders into Rick's Café American and listens to a strange tale related by Sam.
Interpretation.
Casablanca has been subjected to many different readings. Semioticians account for the film's popularity by claiming that its inclusion of a whole series of stereotypes paradoxically strengthens the film. Umberto Eco explained. Eco also singled out sacrifice as one of the film's key themes. The myth of sacrifice runs through the whole film. It was this theme which resonated with a wartime audience that was reassured by the idea that painful sacrifice and going off to war could be romantic gestures done for the greater good. Koch also considered the film a political allegory. Rick is compared to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who gambled on the odds of going to war until circumstance and his own submerged nobility force him to close his casino, partisan politics, and commit himself, first by financing the side of right and then by fighting for it. The connection is reinforced by the film's title, which means White House. Harvey Greenberg presents a Freudian reading in his The Movie's on Your Mind, in which the transgressions which prevent Rick from returning to the United States constitute an Oedipus complex, which is resolved only when Rick begins to identify with the father figure of Laszlo and the cause which he represents. Sidney Rosenzweig argues that such readings are reductive, and that the most important aspect of the film is its ambiguity, above all in the central character of Rick. He cites the different names which each character gives Rick: Richard, Ricky, Mr. Rick, Herr Rick, Boss, and so on, as evidence of the different meanings which he has for each person.
Awards and honors.
Because of its November 1942 release, the New York Film Critics decided to include the film in its 1942 award season for Best Picture. Casablanca lost to In Which We Serve. However, the Academy stated that since the film went into national release in the beginning of 1943, it would be included in that year's nominations. Casablanca was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, and won 3. When the award for Best Picture was announced, producer Hal B. Wallace got up to accept, but studio head Jack Warner rushed up to the stage with a broad, flashing smile and a look of great self-satisfaction. Wallace later recalled, "I couldn't believe it was happening. Casablanca had been my creation. Jack had absolutely nothing to do with it." As the audience gasped, "I tried to get out of the row of seats and into the aisle, but the entire Warner family sat blocking me. I had no alternative but to sit down again, humiliated and furious. Almost 40 years later, I still haven't recovered from the shock." This incident would lead Wallace to leave Warner Brothers in April. In 1989, the film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry as being deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. In 2005, it was named one of the 100 greatest films of the last 80 years by Time magazine. The selected films were not ranked. Screenwriting teacher Robert McKee maintains that the script is the greatest screenplay of all time. In 2006, the Writers Guild of America, West agreed, voting it the best ever in its list of the 101 greatest screenplays. The film has been selected by the American Film Institute for many of their lists.
Home media releases.
Casablanca was initially released on Betamax and VHS by Magnetic Video and later by CBS Fox Video, as United Artists owned the rights at the time. It was next released on Laserdisc in 1991, and on VHS in 1992, both from MGM UA Home Entertainment, distributing for Turner Entertainment, which at the time was distributed by Warner Home Video. It was first released on DVD in 1997 by MGM, containing the trailer and a making-of featurette. Warner Home Video reissued the DVD in 2000. a subsequent 2-disc special edition, containing audio commentaries, documentaries, and a newly remastered visual and audio presentation, was released in 2003. An HD DVD was released on November 14, 2006, containing the same special features as the 2003 DVD. Reviewers were impressed with the new high-definition transfer of the film. A Blu-ray release with new special features came out on December 2, 2008. It is also available on DVD. The Blu-ray was initially only released as an expensive gift set with a booklet, a luggage tag and other assorted gift-type items. It was eventually released as a stand-alone Blu-ray in September 2009. On March 27, 2012, Warner released a new 70th Anniversary Ultimate Collector's Edition Blu-ray DVD combo set. It includes a brand new 4K restoration and new bonus material.
Sequels and other versions.
Almost from the moment Casablanca became a hit, talk began of producing a sequel. One titled Brazzaville, in the final scene, Renault recommends fleeing to that free French-held city, was planned, but never produced. Since then, no studio has seriously considered filming a sequel or outright remake. François Truffaut refused an invitation to remake the film in 1974, citing its cult status among American students as his reason. Attempts to recapture the magic of Casablanca in other settings, such as Cabo Blanco, 1980, a South American set retooling of Casablanca, Havana, 1990, and Barbed Wire, 1996, set in 2017, have been poorly received. The novel As Time Goes By, written by Michael Walsh and published in 1998, was authorized by Warner. The novel picks up where the film leaves off, and also tells of Rick's mysterious past in America. The book met with little success. David Thompson provided an unofficial sequel in his 1985 novel Suspects. There have been 2 short-lived television series based upon Casablanca, both considered prequels. The first aired from 1955 to 1956, with Charles McGraw as Rick and Marcel Dalio, who played Emile the croupier in the movie, as Renault. It aired on ABC as part of the Wheel series Warner Brothers. Presents. It produced a total of 10 hour-long episodes. Another, briefly broadcast on NBC in 1983, starred David Soul as Rick, Ray Liotta as Saka, and Scatman Crothers as a somewhat elderly Sam. A total of 5 hour-long episodes were produced. There were several radio adaptations of the film. The 2 best known were a 30-minute adaptation on the Screen Guild Theatre on April 26, 1943, starring Bogart, Bergman, and Henreid, and an hour-long version on the Lux Radio Theatre on January 24, 1944, featuring Alan Ladd as Rick, Hedy Lamarr as Ilsa, and John Loder as Victor Laszlo. 2 other 30-minute adaptations were aired, on Philip Morris Playhouse on September 3, 1943, and on Theatre of Romance on December 19, 1944, in which Dooley Wilson reprised his role as Sam. Julius Epstein made 2 attempts to turn the film into a Broadway musical, in 1951 and 1967, but neither made it to the stage. The original play, Everybody Comes to Rick's, was produced in Newport, Rhode Island, in August 1946, and again in London in April 1991, but met with no success. A film was adapted into a musical by the Takarazuka Revue, an all-female Japanese musical theatre company, and ran from November 2009 through February 2010. A spoof of this film is shown in The Muppets Go to the Movies, where Kermit the Frog is saying his goodbyes to Miss Piggy. The Sesame Street segment Great Movie Classics showcased a spoof of this film in 1990. In this version, Rick keeps telling the pianist to keep saying the alphabet, "Say it again, Sam." A PBS Kids Ready to Learn segment featured Grover at the piano and Cleo Lyon, of Between the Lions, reminiscing the rhyming game in 2007.
Colorization.
Casablanca was part of the film colorization controversy of the 1980s, when a colorized version aired on the television network WTBS. In 1984, MGMUA hired Color Systems Technology to colorize the film for $180,000. When Ted Turner of Turner Entertainment purchased MGMUA's film library 2 years later, he canceled the request, before contracting American Film Technologies, AFT, in 1988. AFT completed the colorization in 2 months at a cost of $450,000. Turner later reacted to the criticism of the colorization, saying, "Is one of a handful of films that really doesn't have to be colorized. I did it because I wanted to. All I'm trying to do is protect my investment." The Library of Congress deemed that the color change differed so much from the original film that it gave a new copyright to Turner Entertainment. When the colorized film debuted on WTBS, it was watched by 3 million viewers, not making the top 10 viewed cable shows for the week. Although Jack Matthews of the Los Angeles Times called the finished product state-of-the-art, it was mostly met with negative critical reception. It was briefly available on home video. Gary Edgerton, writing for the Journal of Popular Film and Television, criticized the colorization. Casablanca in color ended up being much blander in appearance and, overall, much less visually interesting than its 1942 predecessor. Bogart's son Stephen said, "If you're going to colorize Casablanca, why not put arms on the Venus de Milo?"
Rumors.
Several rumors and misconceptions have grown up around the film, one being that Ronald Reagan was originally chosen to play Rick. This originates in a press release issued by the studio early on in the film's development, but by that time the studio already knew that he was going into the Army, and he was never seriously considered. George Raft claimed that he had turned down the lead role. Studio records make clear, however, that Wallace was committed to Bogart from the start. Another well-known story is that the actors did not know until the last day of shooting how the film was to end. The original play, set entirely in the cafe, ended with Rick sending Ilsa and Victor to the airport. During script writing, the possibility was discussed of Laszlo being killed in Casablanca, allowing Rick and Ilsa to leave together, but as Casey Robinson wrote to Hal Wallace before filming began, the ending of the film set up for a swell twist when Rick sends her away on the plane with Victor. For now, in doing so, he is not just solving a love triangle. He is forcing the girl to live up to the idealism of her nature, forcing her to carry on with a work that in these days is far more important than the love of two little people. It was certainly impossible for Ilsa to leave Laszlo for Rick, as the production code forbade showing a woman leaving her husband for another man. The concern was not whether Ilsa would leave with Laszlo, but how this result could be engineered. The problem was solved when the Epstein brothers, Julius and Philip, were driving down Sunset Boulevard and stopped for the light at Beverly Glen. At that instant the identical twins turned to each other and simultaneously cried out, "Round up the usual suspects." By the time they had driven past Fairfax and the Cayuga Pass and through the Warner Brothers Studios portals at Burbank, in the words of Julius Epstein, the idea for the farewell scene between a tearful Bergman and a suddenly noble Bogart had been formed and all the problems of the ending had been solved. The confusion was probably caused by Bergman's later statement that she did not know which man she was meant to be in love with. While rewrites did occur during the filming, Eugene Harmitz's examination of the scripts has shown that many of the key scenes were shot after Bergman knew how the film would end. Any confusion was, in critic Roger Ebert's words, emotional, not factual.
Errors and inaccuracies.
The film has several logical flaws, the foremost being the two letters of the transit, which enable their bearers to leave Vichy French territory. According to the audio, Help Info, Agathe says the letters had been signed by, depending on the listener, either Free French General Charles de Gaulle or Vichy General Maxime Weygand. The English subtitles on the official DVD read de Gaulle, while the French ones specify Weygand. Weygand had been the Vichy delegate general for the North African colonies until November 1941, a month before the film is set. De Gaulle was the head of the Free French government in exile, so a letter signed by him would have provided no benefit. A classic MacGuffin, the letters were invented by Joan Alison for the original play and never questioned. Rix suggests to Renault that the letters would not have allowed Ilse to escape, let alone Laszlo. People have been held in Casablanca in spite of their legal rights. In the same vein, though Laszlo asserts that the Nazis cannot arrest him, saying, "This is still unoccupied France. Any violation of neutrality would reflect on Captain Renault," Ebert points out, "it makes no sense that he could walk around freely. He would be arrested on sight." Harmitz, however, suggests that Strasser intentionally allows Laszlo to move about, hoping that he will tell them the names of resistance leaders in occupied Europe in exchange for Ilse being allowed to leave for Lisbon. In addition, no uniformed German troops were stationed in Casablanca during the Second World War. Neither American nor French troops occupied Berlin in 1918. According to Harmitz, few of the refugees portrayed would have gone to Casablanca at the time portrayed. The usual route out of Germany was via Vienna, Prague, Paris, and London. Others tried to go from Paris through the Pyrenees to Spain. The film's technical advisor, Robert Eisner, traced the path to Morocco shown in Casablanca's opening scene.
Quotations.
One of the lines most closely associated with the film, "Play it again, Sam," is a misquotation. When Ilse first enters the Café American, she spots Sam and asks him to play it once, Sam, for old time's sake. After he feigns ignorance, she responds, "Play it, Sam." Play as time goes by. Later that night, alone with Sam, Rick says, "You played it for her, you can play it for me, and if she can stand it, I can. Play it." Rick's toast to Ilse, "Here's looking at you, kid," used 4 times, is not in the draft screenplays, but has been attributed to something Bogart said to Bergman as he taught her poker between takes. It was voted the 5th most memorable line in cinema in AFI's 100 Years. 100 movie quotes by the American Film Institute. 6 lines from Casablanca appeared in the AFI list, the most of any film. Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz tied for second with 3 apiece. The other 5 are: Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. 20th, Play it, Sam. Play as time goes by. 28th, Round up the usual suspects. 32nd, We'll always have Paris. 43rd, Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine. 66